All right, let's jump right in. We're doing a deep dive today into a source that's, let's say, fascinating and maybe a bit provocative. We've been looking at audience reactions, box office numbers, that kind of thing, specifically focusing on some, recent big movies with female leads. Think the Ballerina spinoff, Furiosa, the Mad Max prequel. Now, what really grabbed us and what this source focuses on is how both of those films are kind of expected to underperform, like not hit the huge numbers people might expect. And this is despite the fact that, as the source notes, they've actually gotten pretty good reviews, generally positive reception from critics and audience. So yeah, that leads straight to the big question the source is wrestling with: why? If these films are, seemingly well-made, people like them, why aren't they massive box office hits, especially given the franchises they're attached to?
And the source we're digging into, it doesn't pull any punches. It offers a pretty direct answer, and yeah, you might find it controversial. Basically, it blames this underperformance on something it calls Hollywood girl bossing too close to the sun, or just, girl boss fatigue. And according to this source, this fatigue isn't just random. They specifically link it to certain cultural, even political movements that they discuss. Now, it is really important for you listening to get this up front. We are exploring this specific source's claim. We're looking at the points it makes, the examples it uses. Our goal here is to report on and help you understand what the source is actually saying. We're not endorsing the viewpoint itself, just laying out their argument.
Okay, yeah, that's a really strong thesis they're putting out there. So let's unpack it. Let's see how they build that case, what examples and explanations they actually give. So they start, like we said, with Ballerina and Furiosa, and right away the source frames them as, quote, unnecessary spin-offs of male-dominated franchises. John Wick with Keanu, Mad Max with Mel Gibson originally.
Right. And the source points out a few similarities it thinks are important. Like, both came out about a year apart. Both, as you said, generally well-received. They had lead actresses the source admits are liked. They had cameos from, characters linked to the original guys. And importantly, in the source's view, they didn't have any big red carpet controversy. The source kind of lumps them together as basically okay film. Though, interestingly, it does say it preferred Furiosa, mainly because of George Miller's directing.
Okay, but here's where they really make their move, right? The core argument. They say the underperformance isn't because people just hate female leads, full stop. Instead, they argue it's a problem with the approach, like the specific way these characters are written or presented in this current era. And the source flat out claims that both Ballerina and Furiosa would have actually made more money if, John Wick or Mad Max had been the main characters instead.
Exactly. And that specific point about the approach to character leads right into their main explanation. This whole Hollywood girl boss too close to the sun, this audience fatigue, the source traces this fatigue back to what it calls the sins of the feminist male and female. And it specifically singles out the intersectional feminine. It describes this, now this is purely the source's perspective, as a concept from academia that has, quote, seeped into Hollywood and poisoned the well of imagination. The source basically argues that this type of activism, when put into entertainment, actually ends up hurting its own cause. And again, just to be crystal clear, this is 100% the source's claim in their language. We're just reporting it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And the source connects this fatigue to other things, too. It talks about the hashtag #MeToo movement, describing it in its own words as a power grab that was disguised as a movement. And it also mentions a president who, according to the source, was breaking Hollywood's mind, suggesting these things created the environment for this character type to, take hold. Again, these are points made directly by the source. Now, the source does make a point to say, look, female-led action isn't new. And it hasn't always failed. Actually, quite the opposite sometimes. It lists examples from before this girl boss era it defined, like Alien, Foxy Brown, way back. Then it mentions stuff it sees as pre-Me Too era, like Kill Bill Volume 1, Scarlett Johansson and Lucy back in 2014. It also brings up Angelina Jolie in Wanted, although the source kind of questions if Salt is maybe a better example. It thinks James McAvoy might have been the real lead in Wanted.
Yeah, and they add more to that, like Atomic Blonde. And they go even further back, calling The Long Kiss Goodnight a banger. The source's whole point here is that before whatever shifted, audiences didn't really have a single problem with a kick-ass female character, in movies, TV, comics, whatever. So the source is basically asking what changed. And yeah, it heavily implies the hashtag #MeToo movement was a major factor in that change from its perspective. And this history lesson serves as the setup for when the source thinks this specific girl boss era, the one it's criticizing, actually started, according to them. It kicked off with Ghostbusters 2016.
Right. And the source has a lot to say about Ghostbusters 20. Not just that it underperformed or, damaged the franchise in their view. No, the source makes this really strong claim that the film actually innovated something. It argues Ghostbusters 2016 opened the flood not just for putting female leads in male franchises, but maybe more importantly, for pioneering a marketing tactic. The source calls it blaming the fans for your failure, saying the marketing essentially called potential customers names like sexist or misogynist. And the source claims this tactic, which it says proponents independence thought worked so well was then basically copied by a lot of other franchises after. These are very pointed claims.
Definitely. And building right off that, the source then rattles off a whole load of examples of what it sees as this insufferable girl boss trope. And they stress, look, in our view, this isn't just action movies. It's spread into like just about everything these days. The source keeps hammering this point. It's not female leads per se that audiences reject. It's this specific type of character, this specific kind of writing they dislike.
And yeah, they really go through the franchises. Disney Star Wars, for instance, they point to Rey, call her a Mary Sue girl boss. The source argues she stole the family name, wiped out the line. It's harsh criticism. They also hit legacy characters, saying Leia got demoted to General Leia and turned into a girl boss. The source claims the whole sequel trilogy just became a galaxy of girl bosses.
Then they shift to Kurtzman Trek, as they call it, claiming the Federation became an incompetent matriarchy, starting with Michael Burnham. The source uses really loaded terms here like space Jesus, nauseating girl boss, and it specifically criticizes how she commits mutiny but gets promoted later.
Doctor Who gets mentioned too. The first female doctor, Jodie Whittaker, described by the source as an annoying girl boss. They even compare her negatively to the Doctor who came after her.
And then there's Rings of Power. The source claims Galadriel went from being this epitome of grace and beauty to a, quote, snarling orcs girl boss.
Okay.
And they even look ahead, criticizing the upcoming Warner Brothers Lord of the Rings animated movie, War of the Rohirrim. Because it focuses on a female character from the appendices, they label her a girl boss too. And the list just keeps going, even when the female character isn't the absolute main lead. The Witcher. The source claims Henry Cavill's character was constantly nagged by girl bosses. They even speculate that's why he left the show, which is, pure speculation on their part, but it's their take.
Wow. Okay, what else? The Wheel of Time. The source says it was girl boss so hard it got canceled. And they connect that to reports about Amazon's fire as a girl boss. Then Game of Thrones, they claim Arya became a Mary Sue girl boss. Westworld, according to the source, intersectional femme dream filled.
Yeah, and Terminator. Dark Fate gets singled out pretty harsh. The source calls the new Terminator a girl boss. It then uses really controversial language saying Arnold Schwarzenegger's original Terminator character was turned into a rape apologist, and Sarah Connor became an anti-ad, which is quite the interpretation. They even apply this to kids' movies. Toy Story 4, Bo Peep is a girl boss. Incredibles 2, Elastigirl is a girl boss. And finally, they spend a lot of time on the MCU, especially under Disney, claiming Disney Marvel puts a girl boss in absolutely everything. The source says when you have a male hero, it feels like an edict that he has to be surrounded by girl boss. They list Black Panther, Ant-Man, Quantumania, Hawkeye, Shang-Chi. They even claim sometimes these women are written as more masculine than the men, and the source uses some really offensive language to describe one calling Timu Black Widow, the girl boss of the retarded Avengers. She's of inflammatory language, and they look ahead predicting Ironheart and a character they call Mary Sue Storm will follow the same pattern.
Okay, wow, that is a lot of examples across a huge range of stuff. So just to boil down, the source's main point across all this is this specific insufferable girl boss character type, as they define it, is everywhere. And they argue it's Hollywood trying to, redress the balance for representation, but doing it badly. And instead of winning over female audiences, they claim it's actually losing everyone, male and female audiences, in droves.
Right. And that naturally leads the source into criticizing the writing itself. They just call it horrific writing, basically. They specifically target how, in their view, some feminist writers approach the classic hero's journey, Joseph Campbell's model. The source claims these writers tried to subvert or improve it, but the result, according to the source, is a character arc where the woman is already pretty awesome to begin with. And her whole journey is just about fighting the, quote, oppressive patriarchy to get acknowledged for how great she already is, rather than, learning or growing or struggling to become competent.
And the source also mentions a specific trope for villains, the girl boss female. They describe these villains as often being misunderstood or oppressed by the patriarch. And in the end, they tend to either defeat themselves or get forgiven instead of being truly overcome by that's the source. Okay, and circling back to Ballerina and Furiosa where we started, the source brings up bait and switch marketing. Yeah, they called Mad Max Fury Road the prime of this, claiming it was secretly actually a Furiosa movie the whole time, which in their view explains why they made the prequel about her later, even if it underperformed. And the source makes a point that both Ballerina and Furiosa still needed the male character's name in the title for mark, which they see as
Exactly. So pulling all these threads together, the source's final conclusion on why it thinks audiences reject this Hollywood girl boss approach. It states, pretty bluntly, that this type of character portrayal comes off as it is an inferiority complex. That's a direct quote. And maybe even more controversially, the source claims, quote, it's not about uplifting women, it's about getting revenge. According to this source, the way Hollywood has handled this whole thing has actually done more damage to the genre female lead than anything else. It claims the whole idea of the female action star has become almost a parody of itself because of this approach.
And the source wraps up by saying, basically, trends die in Hollywood, and this one is long overdue to end. It claims the entertainment industry took stuff that was made for men, started making it for women, and now, in the source's opinion, no one can tell the difference between the two anymore. That's their final word on it. So, okay,
Yes.
We've laid out the source's argument, its examples, its critiques, its historical take. What does this specific and yet quite critical perspective mean for how we think about audiences, characters, and franchises?
Well, it definitely raises a big question, doesn't it? Even if you disagree strongly with the source's tone or conclusions, it makes you think. If, as the source argues, attempts to empower female characters can backfire, or at least be perceived negatively by some audience segments when they feel it's done as a trope or with a heavy message, well, what does that mean? How does the creator's intention line up with how the audience actually receives it? And maybe the bigger question is, what does it take to create a character, male or female, that feels genuinely compelling, powerful, and resonates widely without falling into traps perceived or real? It's definitely something to keep in mind, as you encounter new movies, new shows, and see how these character dynamics play out.